Hello, classmates. My name is Yenny Chavarria,
My name is Maure Aguirre.
and today we're gonna talk about the article Language in the Time of War. It's the first chapter of a book named The Power of Language by Lynn Young and Bridget Fitzgerald. It was written in 2005.
This chapter intended to give us an overall view of how we could apply CDA and SFL into the analysis of these courses.
And it gives a very easy way to do it, a very approachable, understandable way of doing it through questions, through analysis questions, and then how those questions can be turned into systemic functional linguistics.
The chapter was organized into the following stages. First, it describes or it gives a definition of what these courses are. Then it analyzes reflectively and interpretatively both approaches. Then they give an example, which they call A Call to Arms by George W. Bush. Then they talk about the type of questions in CDA and SFL. At the end, they used another part of a speech, which is called A Call to Arms by Winston Churchill. And at the end, they talk about how we can combine CDA and SFL to analyze these courses.
Okay, we're gonna start by talking about the main concepts, and we chose three. The first concept that Young and Fitzgerald explain, and they explain in a very easy way to understand, is discourses. They said discourses is actually anything we read or hear, TVs, films, newspapers, listening to other people. I mean, that message is a discourse. Texts are discourse. Like, they said it like this: anything that we read or hear can be discourses. So that's the way we're going to understand discourses in this article.
The second concept is critical discourse analysis. They basically describe it as the explanation and interpretation of a discourse, taking into account the relationships that discourses include between language, power, and ideology. The two, or the word that is the most important in this definition is explanation and also interpretation. And we'll see how these two words help us understand the difference between CDA and SFL.
And then systemic functional linguistics also deals with power issues, but it's the tool, right? The critical discourse analysis would be as Maure just said, the explanation, interpretation, but the systemic functional linguistics is one of the tools to answer questions and provide a description of a discourse.
After the test gave us these definitions, they said the authors mentioned why analyzing these courses critically, and the idea is we try to abstract three main stances there. First, to gain a greater understanding of the role language plays in reproducing social inequalities, which is basically part of what critical perspective look for, to find what and why it's been said and how it evokes feeling. Because the idea is not only analyzing the discourse in terms of linguistic features or in terms of grammar, but also what does discourse produces or evokes in the reader or the people that are involved in these processes. And the last one is to determine who has power in a society and how the power is wielded linguistically, how the fact that we use language reinforced these power relationships.
Okay, now as you can see, this is a kind of speech that is called a call to arms. Presidents usually are the ones who say, or political leaders are the ones who give these kinds of speech. The context of this situation was 9/11. As you can see, it was like 4 days after that tragedy. So the political context in the United States was very difficult in that moment. George Bush was talking to the people. I mean, while I'm talking, you can read the speech. And actually, we're going to try to explain what was the message that he wanted to send to people.
Okay, as you can see in this chart, we have two main columns, which are CDA and SFL questions. So the idea is that we're going to go over them to try to help you understand the difference between it. So if you take a look at the questions we have in the first column for CDA, the three main questions, they try to give us ideas about who has the power, but in this case, like, who are the participants that are involved in this speech, because we're talking about George W. Bush speech, right? So I want you to take a look at the first example. It says the president is talking about three main participants. So referring to the text, we can see himself through the word I, to the pronoun I, we as referring to the president and the American people, government, and then those referring to the enemy. So in this speech, there are three participants. George W. Bush with the pronoun I, we as the president in America, and then the enemy referred by him as them or those. I want you to take a look at the pronouns because they represent who the participants are.
Okay, those are the analytical questions, which is the interpretation of, like the pronouns and the complement or the object pronouns as well. Now going to SFL questions, it's the technicality, right? Repetitions and things like that. So the participants, as Maure said, I, we, them, processes intended to be verbs, right? And there are different kinds of processes. There are several. We just put some of them, and then circumstances. But take a look at the order, right? There's an actor, there's a process, and then there's a goal. Although the participants are actors and goals at the same time, here it's clearly stated who is doing what to whom, right? Who it would be the president or America, what would be the process, and then to whom would be the
enemy.
goal. Mm-hmm. Exactly, the enemy in that case, because it's a word.
The second type of questions in CDA talks about or try to find answers related to the attitudes, beliefs, and opinions of the speaker or writer. So the words that you would see involved, they just want to let us know what the intention of George W. Bush is. For example, take a look at tragedy, the loss of life, despicable act of terror. What kinds of feelings would you say he had at that time when he was talking? Feelings related to sadness, feelings related to anger, and those words basically just exemplify these feelings.
Okay, and in terms of SFL, we can see that there are 9 repetitions of the structure will or going to, right? That's future. And that what it means is actually like a threat or promises, okay, to the American people. So we're going to meet, this act will not stand. That's what it implies. The attitudes and stances, which means the opinion of the speaker and then the position. The attitude would be, no, this is not acceptable. this is not acceptable and you should believe what I'm saying. And then the position is I'm going to take actions against it.
The last type of question, the third type, in CD8, it's related to how the discourse is cohesive or is a unifying whole that is not just sentences isolated, but it's like a whole discourse. So if you take a look at the examples, you would see conjunctions, which are but and and, which are two of the examples that the speaker uses to make his discourse coherent and cohesive.
And cohesive, exactly, as a whole. And then in terms of systemic functional linguistic questions, it's about chains, right? Topics that are repeated, like war, tragedy, the president. And then they mention something that is called themes, which are the starting point of sentences. That's what the systemic functional linguistics analyze it. And it's something very peculiar in this speech is that out of 15 clauses that the speech has, 12 are about the USA, okay? So that shows us that it's a unified whole, and the theme and the cohesion of the whole speech is actually cohesive and coherent in this case.
Well, to conclude this article, we just want you to take a look at 4 ideas we decided to include here just because they were important, because they summarize what the article wants to show us. The first one is relations of power are not easy to identify. They are discursive. So it means that they are complex, that probably what the discourse wants us to understand, it's not visible, it's not evident. That's why we need this tool as well to try to understand what is behind that discourse.
Okay, these relations can happen in any text type. It's not just in political speeches. That's why using systemic functional linguistics and critical discourse analysis can help us unveil those hidden meanings. As discourse is historical, it does ideological work. So sometimes we just reproduce these features without realizing, and that's what critical discourse analysis using systemic functional linguistics is what it helps us solve that difficulty.
Additional critical discourse analysis aims to address social problems. It's just trying to understand what's going on around it, and it's a way of social action, because after we were able to interpret and understand and analyze what it's been said, there's an action that we could take after that. And finally, critical discourse analysis and systemic functional linguistics provide the way to make those relations of power explicit, and it helps us raise awareness and analyze what I just said, like analyze what's behind discourses, who said what is the implication that has. So what we understood at the end of the article is that it's very important to have the combination of both approaches, because one helps us understand and interpret, and the other is the tool that would help us be able to do that.
Okay, and why are we mentioning Ruth Wobeck? Because she is a person that the authors quote as to talk about principles of CDA, but we try to combine them and show them as conclusions of the whole article. Okay, guys, thank you very much for listening, and any questions, I'm sure we are going to discuss them in class.
It's a very interesting article, and we invite you to read it. Like, it would help you a lot.
Okay,
Bye guys.